Well, thank you very much to one and all for being here today. Bonjour et merci et tous de vous joindre à nous aujourd'hui. We are so pleased, obviously, to have Manli Ho here with us to speak about the experiences of her father during the Second World War. His moving story speaks to the importance of vigilance in the protection and promotion of human rights. And I'd like to take a moment to thank our partners, the Friends of the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, the Winnipeg Chinese Cultural and Community Centre, and B'nai B'rith for organizing Manli's visit and for giving us the opportunity to share her message of hard work and hope. Thank you very much to our sponsors and our partners. Le Musée canadien pour les droits de la personne sera une réussite parce que nos partenaires en font partie. When the Canadian Museum for Human Rights opens, and I think one of the things that we always are trying to talk to people like you in the audience today about what this museum is and protect what this museum is not. And I think when you get a chance to hear Manli talk about the story of her father, his inspiration and his human rights champion approach to taking a stand is an understanding of exactly what the Canadian Museum for Human Rights is. Le Musée canadien n'est pas construit seulement pour devenir un centre d'éducation. Ce sera une place où les personnes viendront pour aider à changer le monde. I'm sure that most of you have seen this architectural icon that is nearing completion at the Forks. We have about 200 people working on site daily to bring the Canadian Museum for Human Rights to life, in the sense that we will complete the base building at the end of this year, 2012. The team at the museum is also working extremely hard to put together world-class exhibits, content, programming, that ultimate visitor experience for the museum's inauguration. As this work continues, we look for the opportunity to provide our future visitors with the chance to hear stories and personal experiences that enhance understanding of important human rights issues, inspire people to promote a human rights culture. This is why we are honored to have Manli Ho here with us today. Her father's story, which she will share with us today, speaks directly to the vision, the passion, the goals, and the reason that the Canadian Museum for Human Rights is being established in Winnipeg. Her father's story shows how interconnected human rights are, how an action taken halfway around the world can affect us here at home in Winnipeg. There are Holocaust survivors in Winnipeg today as a result of his actions. And I'd like to, at this point, acknowledge Miriam Firestein and Judith Levitt, who are here with us today. We hope to be able to demonstrate, where possible, the international, national, local connections within these stories. Simply put, Dr. Ho's actions had an impact on our city. But what Dr. Ho's story also shows is that he made a decision not to be a bystander in the face of human rights violations. He made a decision to take a stand for what he believed was right, and clearly he did it at great personal risk. I'd like to quote Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who said, "The ultimate measure of a person is not where they stand in moments of comfort and convenience, but where they stand in times of challenge and conflict." In times of challenge and controversy, in the face of the Holocaust, Dr. Ho stood strong against human rights violations that he personally witnessed. The Holocaust, the genocide perpetrated by Nazi Germany against European Jews, has come to represent the very opposite of what we mean today by a human rights culture. When we look at how the Holocaust happened, we immediately see the huge anti-Semitic system of oppression and murder that the Nazis constructed. But what sometimes we don't see that went along with this system was enabled by many, many individuals who chose just to go along. Some people went along because they were afraid. Some people went along because they profited. Some just didn't care about people outside their circle. And some were even convinced that going along was the right thing to do. But a few individuals resisted that horrific system of violation through their individual actions. These few individuals were not able to stop the system, but they did make a difference. In some cases, thousands of souls, people, human beings, fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters, people, they were saved through these actions. Dr. Ho was one of these human rights champions. He saw what was happening, and he made a choice to resist. If there is one thing that we want visitors to the Canadian Museum for Human Rights to take away from their visit, is that they too can make a difference. Le musée vous encourage d'agir dans votre communauté comme à l'étranger. These actions can be small, like taking a stand for someone who is being bullied or speaking out against a racist comment when you hear it. Or in extreme cases, such as the Holocaust, these actions can be so big that someone will risk their own life to save the lives of others, like the actions of Dr. Ho. Every person has the ability to take action for human rights in their own right. The hope and hard work of human rights can only work when individuals in this course of their daily lives decide to take action against anti-discrimination, anti-Semitism, I should say, discrimination and other violations. All of our other human rights laws and institutions, frankly, folks, mean nothing unless individuals like Dr. Ho, like you, and like me, would take a stand for the rights of others. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Stuart, for those inspiring words. Just following up on what Stuart said, we all want to believe that the conditions that existed during World War II will never happen again, but unfortunately hatred and oppression have not been eradicated from our world, and that speaks to why, as Stuart was saying, the Canadian Museum for Human Rights is so necessary. The CMHR will be a beacon shining a light in dark places. It will play a critical role in enhancing people's understanding of human rights, promoting respect for others, and encouraging reflection and dialogue. So today we're pleased to provide you with a glimpse of how the museum will inspire visitors to take personal responsibility for the advancement of human rights and motivate them to take action. So you can see a theme developing today about taking action. We're truly excited that Canadian youth, like those in the audience, will be personally transformed when they come to visit the museum. And I do want to mention that we also have students here from the University of St. Boniface. I was just told that, so welcome to those students as well, and also the organization First Nations for Israel. It's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. N.H. Du, President of the Winnipeg Chinese Cultural and Community Center. Dr. Du is a retired pediatrician, professor, and community leader. In addition to his professional contributions, he is a tireless community leader. He's been the driving force in the development of the Winnipeg Chinese community, a community whose vibrancy is based in large part on Dr. Du's sustained commitment to fostering intercultural and multicultural connections at the municipal, provincial, national, and international levels. Dr. Du will also introduce our keynote speaker, Ms. Manli Ho. Dr. Du?
Thank you. I think that Minister of Provincial Government, Tourism and Immigration, the Honorable Flor Marcelino, come late, so she sits with his honor right now. Let her give her a welcome. Because most of our funding are from provincial government for this project and also for Jewish Foundation, and I'd like to acknowledge that. And also my co-worker or curator of this exhibition, Professor Alexander Marshall, she contributed a lot because you remember the first exhibition at 2001? It was a national sensation. The few articles from Jewish Pope from Toronto, and so after 10 years, and we heard some noise from the community that they still have a few survival Jewish families in Shanghai, in Winnipeg, and they have not been mentioned. So with the help of Professor Alison Marshall, I contact the family, and they agreed to be interviewed. So Alison able to do a very thorough investigation and get all the documents from them and with permission. So we have Dr. Chili Ho, Chili Luke, and get the picture become a permanent display. Material can last for a year. And currently at the Millennium Library, we open up on May the 2nd, will last till May 31st. So the kickoff time is very exciting because we have the Minister Christian Malnick and Mayor Sam Kay will kick off. And then last night we do have the federal MP Joy Bateman attend the lecture last night. So it was very. This morning, I guess you see the Free Press already got on, and Manli was on CBC. A lot of update at 3:30 yesterday afternoon. It's a very good interview. So I think this morning. She went to Southcote, all the way to Southcote High School, and met with students, and the newspaper from Southcote also attending. So I think that Belinda, my press assistant, just emailed me this morning on the article on Globe Mail on December 28, 2010. Almost 2 years ago, were written by Mr. Bernie Farber. He's the CEO of Canadian Jewish Congress. And he promised, he had lunch with Ms. Ho in Toronto, and he promised her to make her dad a household name. So the Canadian Human Rights Museum and us will help to this one become a fulfillment. And so Dr. Ho's name will be a household name around the world. I think that Dr. Ho's will be introduced by her daughter, Manli. I'd like to just briefly introduce Manli. She was born in Cairo, Egypt, because her dad is diplomat, and she was raised in Mexico. And then she studied in U.S. the very famous girls' school, Smith College. I believe that Hillary Clinton and former State Mandarin Albert is also in the same school. So she's become a journalist and reporter from Boston Globe, and also on the report for Chinese daily newspaper in China. So also do a research work, and she planned to write a book about her dad, and hopefully we can share. And I'd like to introduce, she's actually Dr. Ho have 2 children. Her brother older than she is, and she was born when her mother reached over 40 years old. So the gap is between the brother and sister. And Manli, can you come, please?
Thank you, Dr. Du. I'm not sure my mother would have appreciated having her age revealed. But nevertheless, I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. And I thank you for inviting me to share my memories of my father. I'd like to begin by showing you a very short videotape, which is a summary of the story which I'm about to tell you. What you just saw summarized on that videotape has taken me nearly 15 years of research to uncover and document, because when he was alive, my father rarely spoke of his tenure as the Chinese consul general in Vienna from 1938 to 1940, and much less about his rescue of Austrian Jews. That is his diplomatic passport, and on the far left, while you're on the far right for you, is his diplomatic visa, which, as you can see, was already issued by Nazi Germany. He told me of only 2 anecdotes from that era, and one was of his seeing Hitler's triumphant march into Vienna following the Anschluss, which was the merging in March 1938 of Austria and Nazi Germany. Austria essentially became a province of Germany. He recounted how appalled he had been by the fanatical welcome that the Austrians extended, such as these cheering women, and even the famous Vienna Boys Choir, who are saluting under a banner saying, "We sing for Adolf Hitler." The persecution of Jews was immediate and public, such as these Jews who were forced to scrub the streets with acid, and you can see behind them jeering Nazi hooligans, and local residents. And Jewish stores were branded with the word Juden so that people would not shop at them. In fact, most Jewish businesses were immediately taken away from them. And the Nuremberg laws were immediately imposed. And you can see here, that's a park bench that is marked only for Aryans. The second story that my father told me was more personal, and it occurred on Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass, and so called because in an overnight rampage unleashed by the Nazis on November 9 and 10 in Germany and Austria, Jewish-owned stores such as this were destroyed, and the glass from their storefront windows littered the streets. Synagogues like the Tempelgasse synagogue in Vienna were burned, and 30,000 Jewish males between the ages of 16 and 64 were arrested and deported to concentration camps. Now, these are men who are being deported to Sachsenhausen. There were also men who were deported to Buchenwald, and you can see they're still in their civilian clothes, although their heads have been shaved. And finally, they were also deported to Dachau. Now, these were labor camps at the time. They were not yet extermination camps. Nevertheless, the conditions were so harsh and so awful that many people died. On that day, my father faced down the Gestapo to save his Jewish friend, a Mr. Rosenberg, whose first name has forever been lost to history. Mr. Rosenberg had been arrested and would have been deported to a concentration camp had my father not intervened. So as a child, that to me was a very, very vivid story, although I did not understand then the context of that story. And that was that Kristallnacht was the prelude to the destruction of Europe's Jews by the Nazis. But my father's lesson was well understood, and that was that one should stand up for what is right, help those in distress, and not cave in to bullies even at gunpoint. In his memoirs, my father would later write a mere 70 words, and that's a 700-page memoir in Chinese about his career. He only wrote 70 words about how he responded during this terrible period in Austria. He said, "Since the annexation of Austria by Germany, the persecution of Jews by Hitler's devils became increasingly fierce. The fate of Austrian Jews was tragic, persecution a daily occurrence, and I spared no effort in using any means possible to help, thus saving who knows how many Jews. So what is it that he did? The Jews had been placed in a desperate plight by the Nazi reign of terror. To render Germany and Austria free of Jews, what they call Judenfrei, the Nazis created bureaucratic measures which combined economic expropriation. In other words, they took over all their assets, their businesses, their bank accounts, etc., and forced expulsion. And it was a system that they perfected in Austria in 1938 because Hitler dispatched Adolf Eichmann, who would later be one of the architects of the final solution, to set up a center for Jewish immigration. The Jews were told that they could leave, that their loved ones, such as those men that you saw, would be released from concentration camp if they could provide proof that they had someplace to go. As daunting as the Nazi-instituted bureaucratic immigration process was, it paled in comparison to the difficulties for Jews of finding a place to emigrate to. As you could see from the videotape, most of the Western nations closed their doors to Jewish refugees. The Swiss, for example, demanded that Jews be identified somehow. So the Nazis put a red J on their passports. This one belongs to Lottie Lustig, who was 11 years old at the time, and it's unusual because most children were on their mother's passports. But her father was so conscientious about trying to emigrate that he got her own passport, and despite the fact that she was just a child, didn't spare her from being marked that way. So it was at this time that diplomats like my father, who could use their special status as the representatives of a foreign country, they were in a unique position to save large numbers of Jews. All the foreign consulates in Vienna were besieged by desperate Jewish applicants day after day. This is the Polish consulate in Vienna, but most did not offer help. This is the U.S. consulate in Vienna. So this led to some rather bitter black humor among the refugees, and there was one joke called Witz or Globe, which told of a Jew who went to a travel agency shortly after the Anschluss looking for a place to emigrate to. So the agent brings out a globe, and they are looking at several countries which are promptly discounted. One requires an exorbitant amount of money. Another requires a labor permit. A third does not admit immigrants, including Canada. Others want financial sponsorship, including the U.S., and so on. While the two men are reviewing the options, they're twirling this globe on the desk, and finally the desperate Jew says, "Haven't you got another globe?" So my father seized this opportunity, and he became one of the first foreign diplomats to help Jews in Nazi-occupied Europe. But unlike his fellow diplomats, my father was faced some unique challenges as China's representative in 1938. For one, most of his home country had been occupied by the Japanese the previous year. His own government was keen to maintain diplomatic relations with Germany and forbid him to help Jews. So he not only had to disobey orders, he had to devise an ingenious means around these impediments. So what he did was to issue entry visas, or they're called end destination visas, and they're valid for 1 year, to one particular place in China, and that was Shanghai. So on the right, is that on your right? Well, anyway, on the far side is a Shanghai visa that was issued to Hans Kraus. And this is what his late wife, Gerda Gottlieb Kraus, told me about how Hans obtained these visas for himself and his family. She said, he was 19 years old at the time. There were long, long lines in front of the Chinese consulate while people were waiting. The Gestapo was outside harassing them and beating them up. There were so many people that Hans stood in line for many days wondering when he would be able to get in. One day, he saw the Chinese consul general's car at the consulate gate. He saw that the car window was open, so he thrust his visa application papers in through the open car window. Apparently, the consul general received it because Hans then got a call and was told that the visas were ready. So Hans and his family took the Trans-Siberian Railroad to Shanghai, to China, and he met Gerda Gottlieb, and they were married there and later immigrated to Vancouver after the war. So why did my father choose Shanghai as an end destination? This is the Shanghai waterfront, the famous Bund, in 1938. He chose Shanghai for several reasons. First, his intent in issuing the visas to Shanghai was to provide safe passage out of Nazi-occupied Austria. He said, the visas were to Shanghai in name only. In reality, they were a means to help Jews to leave Austria and eventually find a way to the US, to Britain, or to other preferred destination, all on the pretext of going to Shanghai. So in fact, the majority of visa recipients used these Shanghai visas to hopscotch around and make their way elsewhere. And they went to Palestine, they went to Cuba, they went to the Philippines, they went to England, and they went to other parts of the world. Secondly, Shanghai at that time was a failsafe, and these are Jewish refugees getting off a ship in Shanghai at that time. So it was a failsafe for refugees without any visas or who were not able to land elsewhere. The Japanese occupation in China in 1937 had ousted the Chinese nationalist government from authority, and there was no longer anybody at the port. So there was no immigration control, there was no passport control at Shanghai Harbor. It was at that time the only entry point to China that Japan had yet to exert any control over. So there was no one to examine any documents, and anyone could land without papers. As word spread about this through my father's actions, Shanghai was put on the map as a refuge of last resort for the Jews of Europe in 1938 and 1939. And the very use of the name Shanghai provided a means of escape from the Nazis. Eventually, some 18,000 European Jews ended up in Shanghai. And I want to tell you about Eric Goldstadt and his family, who were among them. Eric was 17 years old when he knocked on the doors of 50 consulates in Vienna and was turned down by them all. He eventually went to the Chinese consulate and obtained 20 Shanghai visas for himself and his extended family. But before they could depart, Eric and his father were arrested and imprisoned by the Nazis on Kristallnacht, and they would have been deported to concentration camp had they not produced the Shanghai visas as proof of immigration, that they were going somewhere. And they were released within a few days, and the family embarked on their journey to Shanghai. And on the ship, Eric took this photo of a fellow passenger. I want to tell you that, can I have the next page? This is, I visited Eric in Toronto 2 years ago. He opened it started as a cuckoo clock factory, and it's since, this is the showroom, it's since expanded, and that's Eric with his children. And this trip, in some ways, is in memory of Eric, who passed away on Monday at age 90. So. He's very special. They're all special, but he's very special because his visa, a visa that he obtained was the first one that I found in 1997. So, how many Shanghai visas were issued under my father's watch by the Chinese consulate in Vienna? Well, we'll never know the exact figure. The best we can determine now is that they numbered in the thousands based on the serial numbers of some still existing visas. This visa serial number is 3,619. And some surviving documentation from the Chinese Foreign Ministry, which said that the Chinese consulate in Vienna issued an average of 400 to 500 visas a month to Jewish refugees in the 2 years after the Anschluss. So you do the math. I'd like now to tell you a little bit about my father, because one of the questions I'm most often asked is, what would prompt a man from China to save Jews in Austria when others would not? So my immediate response would have been, well, if you knew my father, you wouldn't have to ask, but he died in 1997, so that's no longer possible. What I can tell you is that my father was a man who strove to live his life according to the best in Confucian and Judeo-Christian values. He was born into poverty in rural China in 1901. That is a picture of his hometown as just a few years ago. He lost his father at age 7, and he and his family were helped by the Norwegian Missionary Society in his hometown of Iyang in Hunan province, which is a central province, which is also the home province of Chairman Mao. He was educated in their schools. That is his middle school, which exists to this day. And because he was such a brilliant student, he was given a scholarship to the elite college of Yale in China, which was established by the Yale-China Association at the turn of the 20th century. And he subsequently obtained a PhD in political economics in 3 years from the University of Munich, graduating magna cum laude, and where he saw the rise of Adolf Hitler. In 1935, he joined the Foreign Service of the Chinese nationalist government with a posting to Turkey. That's him in the light coat, and thus began a 40-year diplomatic career, and one that led him to Vienna in 1937. My father always felt that he had received a full measure of gifts from God. He was brilliant, he was fearless, charming, and dynamic. He was also incorruptible, straightforward, conscientious, and as his daughter, I certainly don't have any bias in telling you that. He also possessed a very hot temper, and I always attributed that to his love for the very hot peppers of his native Hunan province. But among his most valuable traits was his capacity for love and for compassion, and that's him and my mom in 1947 in Cairo. However, my father also believed that these gifts were not bestowed upon him solely for his personal benefit, but for that of his fellow man. There's one other facet which bears mention, and that is that my father came from a generation of Chinese who felt that China had been humiliated and persecuted by 100 years of foreign imperialism. And Shanghai, ironically, was the perfect example of that. Shanghai was divided into different sections, and there was a foreign concession. These were territories, parts of the city that were controlled by the British, by the French. These concessions were above Chinese law, and one of the most famous signs on one of the concessions was "No dogs or Chinese allowed." So, my father's generation was determined not to allow that humiliation to continue. So I think in that sense, he was very sensitive to persecution and to bullying of any peoples. Throughout his life, he stood by his convictions and refused to renounce his principles for the sake of political expediency or even personal safety, and he bore the consequences without complaint. He knew the consequences, but he bore them. In Vienna, he issued thousands of visas to help Jewish refugees, despite being ordered to desist by his superiors, despite the Nazis confiscating his consulate building, and despite being reprimanded and later punished by his own government. He remained undaunted throughout. He neither sought nor received recognition for his deeds during his lifetime, and he was never reunited with any of the people that he had helped. They didn't even know his name. His reason for helping Jewish refugees was simply this. He said, I thought it only natural to feel compassion and to want to help. From the standpoint of humanity, that is the way it should be. I'd just like to add that, especially for the young people, I mean, why am I telling you this ancient history at this time? Because I think in telling you this history, I can show you somebody who did something, who stood up when things were chaotic, when he saw evil, when he saw people being persecuted, and he can be a moral example. But more than that, he is also, I think, people like him also provide us with some comfort. And that comfort means that, there are people like that among us. It's not all black. And I'd like to leave you with a poem that says that much better than I just did. And the poem is, "The sun also rises, the sun also sets. Before the sun of a righteous sets, God causes the sun of another righteous to rise." Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Manli. As we've heard, there are people in this very room who owe their very lives to Manli's father. Cuts very close to home. These kind of stories of courage and humanity, are sometimes very difficult to hear, but we must listen and learn. It was George Santayana who said, "Those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it." It's now my sincere honor to introduce, and she needs no introduction, a woman of, I've written down here, unstoppable enthusiasm. I don't know if that's ever been used for you, Gail. And courage. Gail Asper is the National Campaign Chair of the Friends of the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. She guides us, she inspires us, she unites us as we work together to take up the torch of her late father, Dr. Israel Asper, whose vision was to create a dynamic new kind of museum, a museum of stories and ideas, a museum of action and responsibility. Gail, please join us.
Well, thank you, Howard, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm sure all of you are as thrilled as I am to be here and hear this incredible story delivered so powerfully, so eloquently. I mean, Manli, you're an incredible storyteller. I'm just so thrilled that we've been able to learn something new and come away inspired. And in the middle of our busy days, to come out and hear a story like this, it just changes the rest of the day. It will change the rest of our lives. And again, you could hear a pin drop. We could listen to you all day. So thank you so much for keeping your dad's incredible story alive so that it continues to enlighten and inspire our students, but frankly, enlighten every single one of us. So again, thank you, Manli. And of course, I do want to again thank Leo Ledachowski because he's provided this many donations of food and cash to the museum, and we are so incredibly indebted to him for his support. And of course, if you're going to be a human rights hero, you have to be well fed and have that protein. So thank you, Leo, and the whole gang at Canadians. And hats off also to Dr. Joseph Du. It was a conversation that we had a few months ago, Das Fitguj and I, was it in January, where he had this idea of making this happen, and we were really busy, and there were so many things to think about, but we knew this was the right thing to do, and he persevered and made this happen and brought us all together, and we owe him big time. So thank you, Dr. Du. Now, I'm sure that Dr. Fengshan Ho never expected that he would become a human rights hero when he accepted the position of being the Chinese consul. And despite the unimaginable and unspeakable circumstances in which he found himself, he still managed to find the courage to stand up and do what he knew was right to do, even though he was definitely placing himself at great risk. I don't know if any of you know the story of the White Rose, but these were students who stood up and spoke out against Hitler, and they were beheaded. These were German students who were beheaded, so there's no question that there was great danger in what he was doing. And I believe that probably most people who were saved by Dr. Ho never had heard his name before, but they will certainly not forget his name, and we don't want to forget his name. And that is one of the things the museum is going to instill in us, that we have to remember the names of our heroes so that we can emulate their incredible action and inspire a whole generation of new human rights heroes. And the idea of the museum, of course, is that we're supposed to engage in dialogue, we're supposed to get educated, we're supposed to know our history, but we're supposed to take action. That is the goal of the museum. And in order to do that, we have to know the evolution of human rights in Canada. We have to feature our human rights champions and the everyday people who just fought tirelessly and persevered in the fight for human rights. We're going to be remembering that while we do need to know the past, and this is something that a lot of people still don't understand, so if you can be ambassadors on this front, the museum is rooted in today, and we're here to change tomorrow. But you do need to know your past to do that. So today, we want to actually start on focusing on tomorrow, and one of the things that we want to ask all of you to do is to stand up for human rights. So that's simple things, like standing up the next time a friend or a fellow student is being bullied, or whether you see the rights of someone being violated. Mo Levy was just in Ireland, actually, and was telling me the story of walking on the streets, and there was a black family walking along, and there were a bunch of people were yelling and screaming and insulting this family. And actually, one thing it made him realize is that we actually wouldn't have this happening in Winnipeg without people standing up, and hopefully it wouldn't even happen. But he was reminded about how far we actually have come in Canada and in the States, where we know we're trained. We don't let these things happen. And I'm sure Mo took down every single one of those bullies and saved the day. I hope he did. But the point is that we can all make a difference, and we can all make a very profound difference. We have the power, we just need to use it. Because the world that we have today is our shared responsibility. No one of us should be resting while others' human rights are threatened. So now is the time to take action, and you have your Take Action cards. So before we all go our separate ways, back to school or back to work or back home, I'd like to challenge each and every one of you to write out a pledge to make your own one-person profound difference. I find, when you're studying for exams, when you write things down, it actually sticks with your brain. So whether it's a big action or a small action, it doesn't matter. Just let it be an action that you can take to make this world a better place, to be poised and ready. So for me, it's going to be something like when I seriously actually don't like to rock the boat. So if you're in a meeting and you hear something or somebody saying something that you don't really agree with, and you don't really want to make people feel uncomfortable, but you have to find that inner human rights champion to just say, wait a minute, I have to challenge you on that. So that's going to be my thing. But I hope that you'll take and if you need to take a few minutes to think about it, please do, how you're going to be one person, profound difference. Maybe you will write a great big check to the museum. But Manli, you get a really big pass. You've come a very, very long way. It's very tiring to always be out telling these stories, but we are incredibly grateful that you did make the journey to Winnipeg to share with us. And the good news is we've got several hundred people in the room today. We can all now spread that. We can pass that story forward and create more human rights heroes. So in closing, folks, I just had a crazy epiphany. I was looking at the picture of the museum, and the museum picture right here. And it's a very strong, muscular building. It's actually more muscular, as they call it in the architectural lingo, than I had hoped it would be. There was a hope that some of the steel would be more round and soft, but it's a very tough steel, and that's what's required to keep the building up. And I was thinking that what that steel really symbolizes is backbone. That building has an incredible backbone. And actually, part of the reason why we need to raise more money is that the building needs more backbone. And we've got to make sure that it's strong enough to be the statement of the kind of backbone that you need to be a human rights champion. It's you know, the glass is soft and beautiful, like the ideals of freedom and respect and courage and dignity. Those are beautiful ideas, but you can have all those ideals. It doesn't matter at all unless you have the backbone to carry out and fight for those beautiful ideals. And Dr. Ho was a man of backbone. So I think that this incredible, ugly, tough steel is the kind of backbone that this building needs to have. It's a beautiful metaphor for what we're fighting about. And so we will all walk proud, we'll all appreciate our backbone as we fight for human rights and try to make this a more peaceful and humane and respectful world. So thank you very, very much, all of you, for taking time out of your busy days to hear this incredible story. And I look forward to celebrating the opening of the museum and appreciating that backbone that we all need. Thank you.
Thank you, Gail. I echo your words and thanking everyone for coming out today and making a difference. I hope to see you all again at a future event. And for the media who are here, I believe all the speakers today will be available, as well as students for interviews. So thank you again for coming. Have a good afternoon.